Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming live at you again for another Film Fanatic show. It is 8:38 on a Sunday, so hope everyone's doing good. The weather has been pretty magnificent lately. The last 4 or 5 days, it's been spectacular. So yeah, I'm excited about talking about this movie. I saw a movie last night. I saw the new Ari Aster movie, Eddington, last night, and overall, I think Ari Aster is, just he. I think he's one of the best directors around. I'm a huge fan of most of his work, with the exception of one film. But I discovered Ari Aster's films through a coworker, actually, quite a few years ago when Hereditary came out. I had a coworker who mentioned that he's like, you got to check out this new movie that just came out, Hereditary. He's like, it will knock your socks off. And it came out. I'm not sure if it came out a little bit before or after, but I discovered him as a director and Hereditary around the same time I discovered another just fantastic director, Robert Eggers. And these two guys are you know modern directors and really are just independent directors, and I think they really, when you look at their bodies of work, I mean, the films and the styles that they have are really unique. They are not afraid to mix genres. Hereditary, that definitely is without a doubt, a horror film. It really reminded me of like a classic '70s horror film. It had a when I remember when I first saw it, it brought to mind the original Exorcist. Like it just had this kind of flavor, an unhinged flavor to it. And I remember seeing in interviews with Ari Aster where he was saying he was going to he didn't like necessarily consider himself like a genre director, and he was talking about how for Hereditary the central kind of space in the film was centered on the melodrama, and everything else outside of it was other elements, mostly in the horror genre. But I was just floored by that movie. And then after that, he directed Midsummer, which I think is just another incredible film. And I definitely consider that movie to be more of a folk horror based film. To me, I remember when I saw Midsummer, it really had a tremendous Wicker Man influence, which is one of my all time favorite movies and one of my all time favorite horror movies, and going even further, one of my favorite folk horror films starring Christopher Lee. I love that movie to death. And then he directed Beau is Afraid. It was his first collaboration with Joaquin Phoenix, who again, one of the best actors of his generation or my generation. That movie, I didn't really, I didn't make it all the way through. I was into it for about 45 minutes until I just kind of checked out because it felt really bludgeoning and it felt really monotonous after a while. From a director's standpoint, and I mean, without a doubt, it's very well done, and it was very, uh, well, to say ambitious is kind of putting it mildly, but it was still a very ambitious film. I don't think it landed where it needed to be, but I was ultimately very disappointed with that film. But I think Midsummer and Hereditary are just such great films that it's definitely cemented Ari Aster's like ability as a director. He's had a long partnership with A24, the independent, even though now they have grown to become, from the last 5 to 10 years, they've really grown to become their own kind of independent empire, if you will. Working with directors and putting out films that are, Mostly a lot of the films that they did, especially early on, are more in the horror genre, but they've definitely expanded, to other genres. But they typically, release films that, well, a lot of people consider them to be kind of art house films, but they're just quirky. Most of the A24 films, I feel like, are just kind of quirky. They're weird enough to not really be considered, and they have an independent flavor, and they definitely there's more horror films, maybe especially early on, that you typically would not, see for a Hollywood film. So I was really curious because it was announced. I think it was I heard about this film that I'm going to be talking about today, and that is Eddington. I saw that with a group of friends yesterday, and this is his brand new film by Ari Aster. And I first heard about this movie about probably about 6 or 7 months ago, and I didn't know much about it. I knew it was going. I saw a little thing about it online where he was talking about this film was going to be kind of basically a real personal, about his personal experiences during COVID in 2020, and all of those things, and it was going to be like a drama set in that back, with COVID being the main backdrop. And I saw this last night. We went to Regal Cinema in Augusta. The cast. I mean, again, a lot of the times when you have a superstar cast or star-studded cast, it obviously does not mean that it's going to be a hit or it's going to be a great film, because it's really it really comes down to the chemistry of whoever those actors are and the writing. Of course, this film stars Pedro Pascal, Joaquin Phoenix, Emma Stone, Austin Butler. A pretty incredible stacked cast, really. All of these actors are just doing incredible work for the most part, and their their popularity is kind of through the roof. So I was really curious about this film, and I saw this movie last night, and it is Eddington is an experience. It's my first thoughts of this film was I actually my first opinion, and again, what I always do when I see a movie, especially in the theater, I don't do like the out of theater reaction kind of videos. I mean, I could do that. There have been videos I've done in the past of where I've talked about a movie, a few hours after I saw it, and then the next day I'll post it, or sometimes I would post the video the next day after seeing the movie. But generally, I like to sit sit with the movie, sit with the experience for about 24 hours, and then wake up and see how I'm feeling, and then I'll talk about it. And with Eddington, I stayed completely away. I did see a trailer, and the trailer looked really intriguing and very interesting. It looked super intense. I was really curious about it, but I didn't see any reviews. I didn't hear anything else about it. No interviews, nothing. I stayed away from it. So I went into this film very, very cold for the most part. And my first reaction, and I kind of feel it's still there, that this was probably the best film I've seen this year of 2025. It's a it's a very intense film. I mean, it's kind of best way to describe this film. It definitely, I love the western. It feels like a modern day western. It has a noir kind of vibe to it. It's there's no kind of black and white aspects to the film. Everything kind of has this gray zone, and it's a very topical film. And again, it's a very sensitive subject when, well, COVID is obviously, but in general, when a film tackles very, very modern or contemporary issues, socio-political things that are going on, in 2025 or that particular year, it can it's a fine line because a film, say if I watch a film and it's happened before, where I can see a film and it talks about a certain kind of social political stance on something, even if I really really agree with it, there is a time of where a film can come across as too heavy handed, and where it's kind of bludgeoning you over the head, like you're getting punched in the face, even though you feel aligned with those views. And that's happened, I think, for me with a few films, with even uh, with my personal beliefs, where I consider myself to be a pretty progressive person. I try to think I'm a pretty open minded person, but I definitely am. I'm on the progressive side of things. But I've had that happen where I feel like even if I feel aligned with what the storyteller is trying to say, when it's dealing with something political or socio political, um, it will kind of rub me the wrong way because I feel like I'm like getting hit over the head with it. And Eddington really does tackle. I mean, that's kind of putting it mildly, but it does tackle all of the issues, all of the things that happened during COVID, when COVID started. This film takes place about a few months before, kind of leading into 2020, where COVID came and changed the world forever, and in particular around lockdown issues and all of those things, and then subsequent things that happened afterwards, particularly around the protests around the killing of George Floyd, and and all of those things. So this film is very very ambitious, again to put it mildly, and it does all of those issues are kind of this kind of the backdrop, maybe the centerpiece of this film, but the core of this film is really kind of this kind of Western noir, you know, and it's basically centered on this small town sheriff that is trying to run for election, run for mayor, and he is kind of totally at odds with with Pedro Pascal, who is the mayor, and it has all of this tension that is running really deep between these two characters, and and then you have COVID as being the backdrop, and these completely two different opinions on how people should deal with this thing and how the government should deal with all of these issues that are happening. And also, you have this tiny little town that is so remote from major cities, and how these global, massive global things that are happening affect a small town. So it's a very interesting perspective that way. And I think overall that, considering how ambitious this film is, I mean, Ari Aster is such an ambitious director anyway by nature, but I think the way he handles so many of these, the horrible things that we had to go through, the way he tackles all of these things, I have to say, I never felt, in all honesty, I never felt like I was getting hit over the head with his point or points. I never did. That was my reaction. I felt like that was my reaction because it could. Again, it's a very fine line. It's a very fine line. There was a film that came out a few years ago called "Don't Look Up" with Leonardo DiCaprio, which is essentially about a film about uh, the global warming, and I felt that film, for me, did cross that line of where I was taken out of that movie because I just felt like I was being hit over the head with the same point and points over and over again. Even though I completely agree with the message of the film, I just felt like I was being bludgeoned. Um, Another film I felt that did that was Hugh Grant's Heretic. Really cool film, really cool premise, but the way it kind of tackled um, and kind of condemned organized religion, even though I completely agree and feel aligned with that, with that outlook, I still reached a point where I just felt like I'm getting hit over the head with the same 5 points over and over again, and it just lost any entertainment value, and I just checked out. But I feel like with uh, Eddington, it doesn't do that. It totes that line pretty well, and pretty seamless. And I think the story, between Pedro Pascal's character and Joaquin Phoenix's character, all of this turmoil that's going on between the two of them, on how each character is doing very questionable things, and even within the town, the way the town is socially, coming together or not on certain things, and all of this all of this underlining tension that's coming to the surface. Like, it's handled really, really well, I think, and it's incredibly delicate. And the film has this level of there's a few moments in this film where I felt like it's generally shocking. I didn't see it coming. It wasn't predictable. And it's interesting because this movie does not, I think without a doubt, does not take, when it's dealing with such, socially charged things that we went through as a you know as people, it does such a great job of, like, he doesn't take sides. And he basically talks, or the narrative is kind of about how, well, and again, I feel really aligned with this, but I feel like this movie completely captures the feeling of what it was like during COVID, and I think what it is like now, but especially during those 2 or 3 years, particularly around the lockdown scenario and situation that we lived through, it completely captures the kind of the paranoia, the fear, the lunacy of everything that was going on. I mean, and again, it's so unbelievable to me even now, or kind of mind blowing, that these things took place only 5 years ago. It feels like it's a weird thing for me because it feels like it was a lifetime ago, but yet it feels like it's yesterday. And then it's another part of it for me. It's like it feels like it's just it's still going on, and I feel like it was a situation that we dealt with in this world that we can't we looking back, and reflecting on it, and I felt this way even during the time, that this was a situation that we could not really compare it to anything else in history that we've gone through. And I feel like this film, Eddington, really captures that. Just captures that complete and utter kind of disorientation of this of that time in history, and that we all unfortunately had to go through. And I never felt, again, I thought it did a great job with balancing those things, and it it brings many viewpoints, many voices to the table, but it does not take a side. Um, and I've maintained, and I still I feel this way, even to this day. But I feel like during that time of COVID, collectively, whatever your background was, or wherever your beliefs were, I think collectively as a species, we completely lost our minds, like literally. And I feel like this movie really, if there's a point that this movie has, I think it says that pretty firmly. That collectively as a species, we lost our fucking minds in every way, and also in every conceivable way. wherever you feel aligned, whether you're a person who um, believed that what the politicians were telling us, or what we were our personal choices, the personal choices we were making, whatever walk of life you were coming from, or wherever you were in your life during that particular time. It was I still feel that in my hearts of hearts. I feel like it was a moment in time where everyone at one point lost their minds, and I feel like since then, the fallout since then, like, there's certain aspects of our world that we will never get back, or never see again. And this movie just completely nails it. And I did see an interview recently after I did see a little interview with Ari Aster before I did see this movie, and he was saying that this movie was really about his personal experience in isolation, and how he was going to kind of open up his heart and his and to the world about what his experience was. That complete disorientation of not knowing what is going to come next and what is really happening. And you really get a sense of that. And if you were a person during COVID that suffered greatly, which there were many people, you'll definitely really identify that with that. But it doesn't, again, I think it does a great job with not necessarily taking sides, or saying this or that, or saying this person was necessarily the you know the villain and this person was the hero. It doesn't play that kind of game or card. It just kind of lays out of what the experience really felt like. Um, and it's interesting. So, like, since I saw the movie and I was kind of blown away by it, and I kind of want to see it again. Visually, it's stunning. The acting, is just across the board is incredible, and it goes into all kinds of directions that I did not see coming at all. Very unpredictable, and I love the whole Western flavor. I love the cinematography is absolutely gorgeous. The music is incredible. It's so well directed. And again, it has so many themes going on. It talks about so many issues, and it's heavy. It's heavy, and you could say it might be safe to say it's kind of heavy-handed, but yet there's a little bit of a delicate grace to it, even though it is heavy-handed. I think that it really totes that line, but I think it does it pretty well. And I never felt during especially when the film was definitely exploring a lot of, all of these different subjects and all of these different, I guess, opinions, if you will, that people have around that situation. It I never felt like, okay, I can't. I'm checking out. This is getting too much. I still I Because I felt the writing was so good, and this movie is surprisingly. There's some really funny moments, which I think does give the movie actually a lot of levity, because this movie is super dark and incredibly bleak. I came home last night, and then I was interested to see reviews for this film. Different, I watch a lot of YouTube, guys and girls out there, and there's a handful of YouTube. There's probably about 4 or 5 YouTube channels that I really love, and I really value their opinion. They're really smart, and I checked out about 4 or 5 reviews for Eddington, because again, I didn't hear of anything about of that nature before going to see it. And I have to say, across the board, um, this movie was pretty pretty much decimated by every critic that I saw on YouTube. They really tore this movie kind of a new asshole. They said it was really boring. They said the movie was pointless. They said the movie, well, that the movie had zero point or zero, had nothing to say, and it was too heavy-handed. It was too depressing. It was too bleak, just across the board. And ultimately, most people said that this movie was just really boring. And and the surprising thing that I heard, which was really stood out to me, was some of these reviewers were talking about that this movie was about a subject mainly around COVID, like that's the backdrop of Eddington and lockdown, that it might have been too soon to make this movie. Like, because this is such a part of our history, our recent history, and it's something we're still going through, and we will for the rest of our lives, that this movie was made too soon to be tackling these kinds of issues. And I was just like, huh. And there were even a few people that said that they don't really want to see or hear anything about this time in our history. They don't, it's too soon. They want to like they want to run away from that. They don't want to be faced with those issues. They don't want those things to be brought to the table. And and one person, this the same people, folks that had talked about this film in this way, were they were saying, basically it was too soon, and that this film was a subject. It talked about a subject that they did not want to hear about. They thought it was too soon, and that it didn't have any point of like what's this message, and to the point of where they're actually saying, what was the point of this movie? Why doesn't it give, like, why isn't there some kind of, you know some kind of resolution at the end of it, like where it says something, maybe, I don't know, positive to say, or bring some light to the table. And they were saying, well, it just kind of dismisses, like, what do we expect, that like everybody had lost their minds, and that we're just hopeless as a species, and we can't solve problems, and we ultimately just fail in every way. And and I my opinion was like, well, I think it's perfectly okay to say that, yeah, it was, the whole thing was a failure. And to see where we are now, um, and this attitude of is a prevailing attitude where people don't want to talk about it, people don't want to address it. I remember when COVID was happening. I remember because I went through a very, very dark time through it. So this movie hit me at on a different level. I remember looking up, during lockdown, doing research about, like everyone, you're reading about all of the information that was coming out about people being infected, and all these things. And I remember coming across this one article during that time of where there was these interviews with all of these different therapists and psychologists, and they were talking about PTSD, and different levels of that. And I came across this one article where they were talking about the level of trauma that people suffered through COVID, and especially lockdown. The levels of PTSD was literally equivalent to what a soldier went through in Vietnam. Like a soldier that went through to Vietnam for like maybe one tour or two tours in the Vietnam War, and coming back, if they survived, but if coming back, they had levels of PTSD that were off the charts for what they saw and what they experienced. That was unlike anything else in history at that point. And they said that what people were going through with trauma, and having this, the isolation and all of these things that they were going through, they said in this article that it was equivalent to uh, going on a tour of duty in Vietnam for a year or 2 years, like completely insane. And I think I'm perfectly fine with that outcome of this movie because I do think it does more or less say that collectively at the end of the day we all lost our fucking minds, and that it's not a life affirming movie or where it's going to give you, you know, an affirmation of that there's a sense of hope for how people can get along or solve problems. No, I think it's okay to just say, well, no, we can't figure these things out, you know, and we ultimately fail and never learn from our mistakes as a species. And I think that's okay to say that. And I think if there's a message or an idea, which I don't necessarily would say is the definitive thing, but I think Ari Aster does kind of hint towards that. And I think that's okay. I don't need to have this hopeful thing because I don't really believe that there is that with how things were handled or how they have been handled. Overall, I think, you know, where I live and where we live here in Maine, we were very fortunate, you know, for some pretty sound and, you know, pretty good decisions that were made. But otherwise, I I think that's an okay way to end this film. But pretty incredible film. I think overall this was the one of the best movies I've seen this year, if not the best movie. And considering that how bleak this movie is and how insanely intense this movie is, it's still very entertaining. And I think it really comes to the there's a lot of action in this movie, which I was very surprised, and the whole kind of Western vibe. I really love that vibe, and yeah, it's an incredible film. So thanks again, and I will see you next time. Peace.